Yeah, it shouldn't end actually because it's like an unlimited thing. Hopefully, we will get all the people back. Yeah. We'll just give it a minute so that the
Sure,
people
sure.
can just join.
Sure.
Okay, the people are coming in, so that's good. All right, we'll just wait for a few seconds and then we can start. All right. So, so sorry for that. I don't know. We had a technical glitch and it just the session just ended by itself. So I hope we didn't miss anyone here. So, Prasenjit, I'll request you to join as an attendee. Can you do that? Thank you. So, continuing on what we are doing, I was trying to introduce Krish here. So, and I think many of you know about his work in Masalalab and has been following his handle. So, he's not a chef, but he's very interested in cooking from a very different perspective. And I think he believes in trying and testing things by himself, which is the kind of message that we want to give in through this webinar. So without delaying much, I just wanted to ask Krish that why did you think about Masalalab and this concept of connecting with people by mixing food and science?
I mean, I've been interested in cooking ever since I was a teenager because my mother had a working job and, she had three sons and I was probably the only one least likely to cause an LPG explosion in the house. So I was taught how to cook, and then I think and then I lived abroad for about 6 or 7 years. Again, it became a necessity, if you will. My way of learning has always been, I've always been terrible at memorizing things. So for me, understanding everything down to its first principles, breaking things down to a meta model rather than, just memorize a recipe and so on, was just a way for me to easier for me to sort of put things back together rather than just memorize something and remember too many patterns and so on. So that I think is the combination of how I ended up documenting food through documenting these patterns as experiments, as science experiments. And I think science is essentially people sort of mistake science as being this sort of filled with arrogant intellectual scientists, but no, it's actually a method for uncovering truth, right? By going about it in a very methodical way, and also with a lot of humility, meaning that you try something, it may not work, right? And so on, right? You add 80% water hydration percentage to chapati, and it turns out to be quite dry, and you might want to increase that the next time, and so on. So, whole idea is for you to be able to test what works and try and explain it from basic principles as opposed to simply saying no, just do it because it's your mother said so or your grandmother said so, right? And I think that is in a sense what got me interested, and I've always been into science communication, and it just felt like there was an opportunity to explain science through cooking, right? And people think it's I'm explaining cooking through science. No, actually, my interest is actually getting people excited about science. And it just feels like cooking is one of the easiest ways to kind of do that because it's a lab that everyone has at home.
Yeah. No, I think that's an interesting thing to contextualize it, and which you don't have to just contextualize in cooking, right? Because these are the principles which is spread across any context that you take. So I know that you use social media quite a bit for relaying this message, but do you think that social media is a boon and a bane at the same time?
No, absolutely. It's not a boon at all. Social media is an absolute dumpster fire and a bane, meaning that if at all mankind could sort of do something to turn the clock back, I mean, we would just go back and just destroy every social media platform ever founded. Because I don't think again, and I'm saying this as someone who is an influencer. I'm saying this as someone with like 1 million followers. And I'm saying this as someone where that medium has actually given me fame and has given me the ability to sell my books and so on. But really speaking, I think net maybe 100 years from now, I truly believe that we will look back at this time and see what on earth did we do, right? How did we let some algorithms control what we see,
Yeah.
create echo chambers, spread misinformation, pander to our basest sort of desires, and so on. Right. So in that sense, I don't think there's anything remotely good about social media. Like if you're young and you want to do good in life, I would just say absolutely stay off social media. But as I said, I think it is still okay to treat it as a medium of communicating to others, right? Um, but you have to do it in a way that it doesn't sort of affect your mental health and so on. You don't fall for the dopamine rush of, oh, I'm not getting validated, I'm not getting likes,
Yeah.
and that somebody said something wrong in the somebody was angry with me in the comment section, and so on, are all actually completely pointless things, right? So in that sense, it's just that I think in the absence of an actual healthy media ecosystem, I mean,
Yeah.
this is essentially where we are right now.
Right. No, and also because I'm now going back to food. So because this is, I think, a big industry, right, where people actually leverage on this information and connect tradition versus the modern approach to it, and then say this is healthy, now this is nutritious. You change your diet. There are like 1 million dietitians coming there and actually playing around with the science of food. So, what is your take on these kind of approaches? And how should people actually take this information? I'm not saying every information is wrong, what is out there,
Yeah,
but then what should be your, your perspective or your approach to that?
I think, see, when it comes to food, there is indeed, I think, a phenomenally useful thing to understand food from first principles, because it's the one foreign object that you put into your body all through your life, and you
Yeah,
absolutely need to do it.
yeah.
And I think it has a disproportionate effect on how healthy you will
Mm,
be later in life, right?
mm.
And so to that end, I think it is always better. And in my experience, I have found that high school biology, chemistry, and physics
Mm.
um, are actually enough. You don't need a PhD. You don't need to
Yeah,
understand anything very complicated, right? So getting that first principles understanding actually helps you see through what is nonsense and what is not, and what's just bad statistics, or what is just a anecdotal bias. And there are so many fallacies that we are all subject to cognitively, right?
mm.
And I think the more you kind of really break things down to first principles, it makes your life easier. Then you're not worried about 20 videos saying entirely opposite things.
Yeah,
Suddenly people will say, oh, this is good, that is bad, and this is how you should do it, or will cause cancer, and so on. And you broadly kind of build that muscle. Going back to the point about social media, right? Science
yeah,
doesn't happen on social media, right? To be honest,
yeah.
science happens in laboratories, and science is hard, right? And it's important that people treat what you see on the internet
Mm,
not as knowledge but as content. There's a
mm.
difference. See, I think if you read a medical textbook, it's like to understand one muscle in one heart takes like 500, 600 pages. Okay,
Yeah,
that's knowledge. You
yeah,
need deep research, deep study, mentoring, and a whole bunch of other things and practical stuff to understand something deeply. Um, do not be under the illusion that you can watch a YouTube video or a short or an Instagram reel and somehow you've learned something. It's content, it's not knowledge, right? So don't get provoked by it. Don't instantly, assume that it is correct.
mm.
Treat it as a provocation, that maybe make a mental bookmark and go maybe read up, and then you'll really mostly understand that most things are exaggerated on social media. Most things are
Yeah,
exaggerated on the internet. Right? When you search for a symptom on Google search,
yeah,
you will see cancer coming up, regardless
yeah,
of what symptoms you type in, right? Because the internet is in the digital media is kind of oriented towards showing you the most sensational but rare occurrence, not necessarily the average. It's the same thing about whether there's no headline that says that today there was no crime in Delhi. Is never a
yeah,
headline,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
It's always the rare, occasional, but still rare, violent
yeah.
incident, and that ends up being. So I think that's the way you have to also build that muscle for navigating this world of, there'll be too many things, and people will also say it's scientific, it's not scientific. Just by people saying it doesn't mean peer review matters. You being able to replicate that matters.
Mm.
Other people citing it also matters. That's really how you need to think about this.
Yeah, so because now coming to the lab bit, because you said that it doesn't have the science doesn't happen in social media, right? So in
Yeah.
the labs, I mean, there are many universities, like millions of universities all around, doing different kinds of work, publishing so many
Yes.
things. Again, if you look
Yes.
at scientific journals, so for many of the people, they don't know what is an impact factor, for example, for a journal, which journal should you go to? So
Yes.
sometimes there are some journals who are saying smoking is injurious and then you will have cancer and all that, which is the most common thing. But there are journals who
Yep.
write that they work, against Parkinson's disease.
Yep. And
And
nicotine does.
if you're a smoker, you might
Yeah.
not get Parkinson's disease. And they have statistics, they have measures.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
just content. So
Yes.
how does one actually navigate the system if you don't have a PhD or something like you said, with the
Yeah.
basic
Yes.
knowledge of science?
Yeah. See, I think this is, I kind of goes back to, I think the single most useful high school or middle school subject to revise on a
Mm,
constant basis,
mm,
more than anything else, as a common base for everything else is statistics,
yeah,
right? It's also
yeah,
something that we kind of broadly sometimes understand the mean, median, mode, and those kinds of things. But we very, very, very rarely does everyone understand probability really well, right? And you have
mm,
to understand that experiments and statistical significance and Bayes theorem and so on are all foundationally about probability, and it's very non-intuitive, right?
mm,
Just to give you a sort of very simple example, right? You will often find that there'll be a report that said that these food coloring that's used in these
yeah,
candies and things like that, right?
yeah,
Or these are carcinogenic, and consuming it increases your cancer risk by
yeah,
100%, right?
yes, yes,
Now, if you understood your statistics fine, you would not read that, oh my God, it increases it by 100%. That's astonishingly scary. And instead, you would ask the question, what's the actual base rate? Right?
mm,
What was the original rate of cancer to begin with? Right? And it will
yeah,
turn out that will be some 0.01.
mm,
And then the addition of this in a rat's petri dish, with bacteria, or in a rat, some
mm,
unholy amount, not the food itself, but just that chemical itself, increased it to 0.02.
yeah,
0.02 and 0.01 are actually 100% is the difference, right? So
yeah,
one is
yeah,
a double of the other, right? So I think so. The problem is that if you build a sort of build numeracy, right? Really just ask these kind of basic questions about what's the size of the denominator, right? And you'll also be able to quickly make out that there is a distinction between people saying that for 100 years we've known that cigarettes are absolutely terrible and they actually cause, they
yeah,
increase the risk of lung cancer and so on. There's just
yeah,
absolutely no doubt about it. We have a century's worth of evidence, right?
yeah,
And likewise, the actual paper, if you really dig into it, says that it's the effect of nicotine on Parkinson's that's being studied,
mm,
right?
yeah,
You don't just smoke nicotine, you smoke all that tar and all the other things.
everything, yeah,
The cigarette is a nicotine delivery device, right?
yeah,
So if at all you want to look at the impact of nicotine on this, they might perhaps directly inject into the blood or do something like that, and
mm,
not necessarily encourage people to smoke. But the
mm,
media wants a
mm,
nice headline. They look at this paper and say, by the way, smoking can also prevent
yeah,
Parkinson's. Yeah, of course, but the problem is that it's okay to delay Parkinson's, but it's not great to die of lung cancer before, right?
yeah,
I mean, these are
yeah,
two entirely. So it's just that I think we are people, a lot of, I think, problem with science communication, I feel, is
mm,
that scientists are not great science communicators.
yeah,
They're
absolutely,
actually, if you really ask me, to be a good scientist, your primary skill has to be to communicate to other scientists, not to the public.
yeah,
Very few people are both. Right? They are
yeah,
also able to communicate, dumb it down, and communicate. But a good, real, serious scientist is one that's really good at communicating to fellow scientists. And we know how
mm,
scientists communicate with each other. They use
yeah,
language that you won't understand.
yeah, a lot of taken for granted.
Yeah, it's taken for granted, and it's also very precise. I mean,
Yeah,
there's a shared vocabulary that they rely on, right? So they don't use ambiguous terms and so on,
yes,
and they know
yes,
exactly what the caveats are and those kinds of things, right? So I think the problem now is that in India we don't have enough people who are science communicators. But
mm,
again, as I said, the act of science communication itself is done by the media, and they do it for clickbait. They basically just exaggerate something, right? So they're going to look at this and oh, by the way, this particular thing reduced the number of cancer cells in a rat's tail by 10% or something like that. The
mm,
headline will be cancer has been cured,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Although we are not even remotely there, right? So it's just that I think this is also the problem, right?
mm,
Doctors and scientists. On the other hand, there is those who want to miscommunicate and those who want to build a social media audience by just spreading fear, etc., etc. Their job is easy. They're not accountable at all, right? So
Mm.
always look at these kinds of things, right? And always remember that there is way more to science than the headline you see in the media.
Yeah.
And it is, yes, it is hard for you to understand every scientific paper and so on. But again, honestly, let me tell you this. My favorite thing to do is to ask ChatGPT or Perplexity or Claude or any of these things to explain the paper in whatever level you want to understand and go as deep as you want to go. Like, not everyone may
Mm.
have the time, but if you are interested in science, trust me, build a muscle to learn how to read papers. And if you don't have someone to help you, use AI. These things
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
really, really good at explaining,
Mm.
how something that's very, very complicated. You might not understand, like, for example, what is a particular factor, what is the statistics, the meaning of this particular error rate and so on, right? So this is, I
Yeah.
think, you can really just simply ask AI to explain.
No, I think that's why one needs to use these tools smartly and not to just
Yeah,
write
exactly.
emails and
Yes,
things like
yes,
that, but
yes.
to smartly understand what lies, beyond us. So, I mean, but there was an interesting thing that you talk about context and about the quantity of things, in the context of smoking. But now, I'm taking it into the context of tradition versus, modern approaches, modern medicine or whatever. So
Yeah,
there are some things which has been followed by
yep,
generations after generations, right? And
yes,
then
yes.
they say that, for example, if you give brandy to a pregnant woman, they don't mention the quantity actually. That is very good for the kid. But then nowadays, if you just say that, okay, when you are pregnant, you shouldn't have alcohol at all,
Alcohol, yeah,
right?
yes,
So
yes.
is that a war between tradition versus the modern approaches, or are we misinterpreting what has been done in the past, and then we are sort of extrapolating
Yeah,
it somewhere and
yes.
going somewhere else?
I think this is a very complicated. I think there are many layers
Yeah.
to the answer here, right? See, first for starters, let's also establish that, as Nassim Taleb sort of says, that it may not be sensible to trust bad science based on one sample, one study, one
Okay.
rat study, and
Mm.
throw out 2,000 years of a practice
Yeah.
that people have been doing and that has demonstrably helped them, right? Because it's kept us alive and so on, right? So in that sense, I think wants to guard you against that. Don't throw away traditional knowledge simply because some poor scientific paper says otherwise, right?
Yeah.
So in that sense, I think we have to be humble about this, but it's
Mm.
important to validate traditional knowledge. But you do have to design those experiments properly,
Mm.
and in a way that you can't just simply dismiss it on the basis of one or two things that you see on the internet and so on, right?
Mm. Mm.
So because remember, when it comes to food, um, science is new. We've been sort of, experimenting, cooking in the lab. We've been sort of testing which mushrooms are poisonous and which are not, which crustaceans will, cause allergies or not, which plants are toxic versus not. And we've been sort of doing this. And there is a certain set of practices that have come. So one, you must not just throw it out per se, but at the
Mm.
same time, a couple of questions you must always ask,
Mm.
right? The Why did those people make them? Let's take an example, right? You must
Mm.
not mix dairy and seafood is a rule in Ayurveda. Right? Dairy and meat, dairy in many things, right? You're not supposed to mix, right? Uh, and you really need to think about why would people have a rule like that? Because
Yeah.
in the modern context, you could say that, hey, you know what? The Mediterranean people absolutely mix dairy and everything else, and they live 20 years longer than Indians. So surely, what are we missing here, right? Uh, and then you can logically think about the fact that there was no refrigeration in India.
Yeah.
Even 50 years ago, there was no practical refrigeration available to everyone. And food
Yeah.
would spoil really quickly. Milk spoils quickly, meat spoils quickly, fish spoils quickly, right? So
Yeah.
a lot of rules are largely there to prevent people from doing something silly that could cause food poisoning. That's all, right?
Yeah.
And then and you lose the context of all of that. You know that the world is entirely different now. You have freezing, you have pasteurization, you have so many things that keeps food safe for you today that did not exist back then. So you have to look at many of these rules through that lens and appropriately adjust as the case may be. The second and slightly more tricky thing is
Mm.
actually the very idea of also asking, when somebody says it's traditional, really investigate that. How traditional really, right? So I'll give you a simple example. 80-90% of everything we eat in India was not eaten more than 200 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Potatoes were not widely grown. Chilies were
Yeah.
not widely grown. All of these are from Europe. They're from South America. They were introduced by British or the Portuguese, right? Cauliflower, cabbage, beans, tomatoes. Most of the most commonly eaten vegetables today in urban India were not eaten 200 years ago. Right. In fact, we were not even daily rice or wheat eaters. We were usually eating mix of millets based on which part of India you were. Right. Rice was a special occasion thing and so on. Right.
Yeah.
But then it was with the British setup of the rationing system for famines and all of that. They said, look, I can't provide food security with so many millets. I will just provide it for rice and wheat, and then our diet switched entirely to rice and wheat over that sort of colonial period. Right. So you really have to ask people how old is this tradition exactly? Then there's something even more trickier, right? People will use the word Ayurveda, right? But absolutely refuse to tell you where exactly it comes from, right? Now, it will shock most people to realize that what we today declare as Ayurveda, right, is a product of some late 19th century Bengali, the first generation of Bengali English bilingual speakers who sort of had an opportunity to go to English schools and universities and so on, deciding that, look, a lot of that Indian knowledge is somehow orally transmitted. It's not very well written. We need to write stuff down and put it in libraries, which didn't exist otherwise, right? So they went around, gathered whatever copies, and their editorial call for translating whatever they found. And it's what we say today, Ayurveda is not based on some 2,000-year-old text, but a text from like the 1890s by the Asiatic Society or something in Calcutta, right? So in that sense, who knows what was in the original, right? Now, when you actually dig into it, find some Sanskrit original, etc., what you'll find is that Ayurveda and what you practice today seem to not they are poles apart. Okay, your point about brandy. A lot of Ayurveda today has a very sattvic vegetarian bias. It's a product of the last 200 years, right? But actual Ayurvedic remedies are, oh, you have this problem. Why don't you drink the blood of this deer? You have this problem. Why don't you eat bone broth of this particular thing? Or for this ailment, you need to eat the Indian monitor lizard, right? Or for this problem, you need to mix garlic along with this alcoholic drink, right? So alcohol and meat and these things were all considered medicines in Charaka Samhita and all of these kinds of things. All of that sort of stuff has gotten sanitized. Right? And so again, so you really have to ask yourself, what is tradition, right? How old is it really, right? Or is it just because I think a lot of we sometimes over historical periods we often create traditions to rally people together, right? So, for example, I mean, everyone's familiar with the Ganesh Chaturthi sort of festivals and people carrying the Visarjan and all of that. That's not an ancient tradition. It is absolutely a late 20th century tradition of Lokmanya Tilak and others of the freedom movement, creating this thing to bring people together. Right. So, so you have to remember that as well. So I think it's good to respect tradition. You must not dismiss it outright. It is absolutely. I think your grandmother is far more likely to be correct about food than some random science paper that you read, right? And in general, I think it's good to be humble about that. But at the same time, you also have to be skeptical about these things.
No, I think that's a very interesting point, which leads to my next question about religion and food. So, we have many religions following different kinds of dietary regimes and things like that, and something you bring in morality, ethics, the principles of the religion into being. But originally, was that how it started, or was there actually a scientific reason for telling not to eat garlic or something for a certain sex of people because they're coming from a different genetic makeup and they're coming from a different geography? So, do you think that there is some sort of a connection there?
I mean, so very specifically, like, see, it's possible there could be, like, for instance, when it comes to milk, right? The South and the East India is like 70% lactose intolerant. So for sure, I think their traditional culture of drinking less milk and eating more yogurt makes absolute sense, right? Because it's lactose free, less lactose, and so on. Yeah, because genetically, absolutely, genes apply there. But when it comes to garlic, it has nothing to do with genes. right? Garlic and onion and many of these things and meat eating in general uh, definitely has to do with uh, whatever was the social elite some 3 or 4 thousand years ago determined that people who are not elite ate these things and we will not eat it,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
it's so then you then defined sattvic as being not including garlic, not including onion, and so on. It's purely identity forming, right? But again, as I said, there is a tendency for people to then want to justify that using science and say, oh no, you cannot do meditation or you cannot have a clarity of mind if you eat onion and garlic, if you do not eat sattvic food and so on, which is absolutely not true because onion and garlic are some of the healthiest things you can ever eat at any given point of time.
Mm.
The breadth and the odor apart, I mean,
Yeah.
it is absolutely one of the most healthiest things you can actually eat. And within India itself, right, within this, both the subcontinent and China and others and so on, there are people who do meditation and absolutely eat onion and garlic, right, and they seem
Mm.
to have no problems. So I think people always need to be very careful about wanting to find some scientific justification for a purely religious this thing. Somehow, I think maybe the right way to think about it is to don't search for those things at all.
Mm.
It's a religious practice, and it's absolutely fine to follow it because it's a religious practice,
Yeah.
right? And it is part of your identity, and you want to respect your elders, your family, your culture, your history. It's a perfectly good reason to do it. And don't eat during eclipse, right?
Mm. Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
why people are trying to find some random reason that why a dead rock 300,000 kilometers away is actually going to have an effect on what you eat, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Depending on its relative position between the sun and the earth.
Yeah.
I don't know why people need to find that. All you need to say is no. It's a culture. It's again we find religious ritualized reasons to fast,
Mm.
and fasting is a good thing, right?
Mm.
Why I do it doesn't really matter. And for me, it's easier to do it because I say, oh, it's Amavasya, it's eclipse, I do this. And it's some sort of excuse to fast. That's a great thing, right? You don't
Mm.
necessarily need to somehow say that, no, the moon actually has an effect on your food.
Yeah. Yeah.
And at
Yeah.
that point, it kind of becomes you demean your tradition by using bad science.
Mm.
That's what I
Mm. Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's a very interesting thing, which is, I think, also very controversial because people do not want to discuss this openly
Yeah,
for many reasons. But I
yeah. But
think,
I also
again,
think there is the tendency to want to connect it to science is also a relatively modern phenomenon.
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't think
yeah,
it was a case. People were perfectly comfortable doing their own religious thing for purely religious reasons,
right,
right?
right.
It's just that somehow we have elevated science to this, and now the new elites in society are all scientific, and somehow there is this tension between you people look down on people who are too religious and so on.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the interesting thing is that if you look at monotheistic religions,
Mm.
this schism is very hard,
Mm.
right? It's very hard to find someone who is a scientist, rocket scientist, and also deeply religious and believes the Earth is only 4,000 years old. It's very, very rare. Right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
there's a
yeah,
hard schism between science and rationality. It's a very Western thing. I think it's
yeah,
also important for us to remember that it's not an Indian thing at all.
yeah, yeah,
So ISRO scientists have absolutely no problem applying Newton's laws and Einstein's laws to send a rocket to Mars or Moon,
yeah,
but have no problems breaking a coconut for good luck for that rocket
yeah,
or putting a tika on that rock. They don't see sort of course you can say that, come on, that's unscientific. It's all the machines that matter. Putting that tika and breaking the coconut is not actually going to change. It doesn't matter. You've done this phenomenally risky experiment, and this is millions of rupees at stake.
mm,
And you want to collectively come together and wish it good luck, and you want to do it symbolically using
yeah,
your traditional markers. I think it's absolutely fine. You can still be a scientist and be absolutely okay with doing that. And I think that is something that Indians seem to forget. Right?
mm,
And nowadays, what we find is that you have these godmen who come and say, "Oh, our ancient people knew everything. All this science is
yeah,
nonsense." Right? And
yeah,
they do that on YouTube and using microphones and the social media, all of which are products of a scientific world.
yeah,
Right? The hypocrisy is actually quite silly. So there is no need to do that. The sensible way to do this is to say, yeah, science is science. I mean, if you want to explain how the world works, use that, right?
mm,
But if you
mm,
want spiritual stuff where you want to understand your role in the universe, by all means,
yeah.
follow your what your spirituality and religion is.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the dissection is very important, and also treating it differently, I think is
Yeah,
super important. Otherwise, I think it'll mix up and create another stream of beliefs, which is an intermix of religion and science
Yeah.
and tradition and everything. And
Yeah, and it's very shallow, to be honest. And
yeah,
it really has no staying power at all, right?
yeah. No, absolutely. No, I just wanted to sort of take a break at this moment to see if there are any questions. So, if you have missed in the beginning, I had just asked people to raise their hands using the emoji, or you put questions in the Q&A box. We have some questions right now here,
Yeah, I
and
can see three questions. So if
yeah,
you want me to answer those, yeah, I can do that.
yeah.
Yeah. So I think one question you want them to ask, or I could just read out an answer.
You can
How do you
read
want?
out. You can read out.
Right. So I think obviously I think when I said social media is a bane, obviously I think it probably came as a surprise to most people. But again, as I said, I'm saying it as it doesn't mean you should not use it. Sometimes your profession might require you to use it.
Yeah,
But I'm just saying that don't treat it as some sort of a addiction in any sense, right? Um, I only use it to talk to friends. That's absolutely fine. There's no harm at all. Actually, those kind of uses are perfectly fine, right? And I think GK says that I don't think it's a bane. It's up to individuals. One has to be consciously in control, as opposed to being controlled by social media. Absolutely right. And the only thing I will say is this: as someone who works in AI, I can tell you the neural network that powers these algorithms. Most people do not have a neural network that can beat that. Yes, most people simply get addicted. The vast majority, you ask people how long they spend on their phones, they'll say, "Oh, I only spend half an hour." And when you actually check the app, it will say 4 hours, right?
yeah,
It's just that dopamine is such a hard thing to resist, right? So all I'm saying is just be mindful, by all means. Yes. I think there's also the second part of the question is how are you in control of consumption, not creation, right? That's actually a great question. So in fact, people ask me how I find time to be a techie and be a
yeah,
creator on food and also a musician and multiple instruments and so on. Is that for me, actually, I follow this rule of a 50-50 consumption creation ratio, right? Meaning that for me, reading a book is consumption, watching a Netflix series is consumption, scrolling through social media is consumption. I mean, I think I also rank them. Reading a book is the most superior form of consumption in my mind.
yeah,
Then followed by watching videos and listening to long form podcasts. And then last worst thing is, Reels and Twitter and all of that sort of stuff.
yeah,
That's the psychological equivalent of eating, only chips and namkeen and things like that, right? And so on. Whereas the reading a book is like, eating a well balanced thali and so on with high protein, right? So 50-50 essentially means that sometimes when I hire people and I would ask them for their hobbies, and they'll say it's watching movies or listening to music. I said that's not a hobby. That's consumption. Consumption can never be a hobby.
yeah.
Hobby has to be creative. Creative means to create. Okay?
Mm.
So you watching, some art film from France is consumption. Taking your phone and recording a video and putting out a reel is creation, right?
Yeah.
Writing a blog is creation, right? Writing 1,000 words a day or 250 words a day, writing a diary
Mm.
is creation, right? Just recording your own thoughts, right? Making voice recordings, making a handwritten, greeting card for a family or friend, right? Writing a letter. These are actually acts of creation, right? We are making pottery and so on. So I think it is, for me, it is really just about, I just mentally make note of, I treat myself to consumption only after I spend time on creation, right? So it's like you eat a healthy meal, you enjoy the dessert. So, I will then write out a script for one of my reels and then go watch some YouTube video, about something that I enjoy watching. So I think it's just that you have to consciously get into those habits. And I think these ritualized habits are important because otherwise, don't rely on willpower. It's better to make those as habits rather than just simply rely that, no, I will remember. You won't. It's just where there is just so much to consume that, and these platforms are now telling you earlier you have to watch something and you have to like wait 1 week for the next episode to come. They now tell you can binge 7 seasons.
Yeah.
And people, yeah, right. And it's unprecedented. There's no contest. You might want to be very careful.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I think it's a very fair point, and also what you're consuming and how
Yeah.
you're consuming from the social media. So I
Yes.
think probably we can go into the next question because there
Yes.
are more
So the
questions
next
coming.
question is how to not fall for misinformation regarding food. I think we kind of broadly covered it, right?
Hmm.
Reliable sources. See, rule number one is the easiest way to do this is, as much as possible, eat what your grandmother ate. Okay. And the reason I say grandmother is because in general, and maybe 50 years from now, I'd say great grandmother, because I think we want to try and baseline your diet to the time when there was no processed food available. Right? I think that's so it's a good starting point. Once you do that, after that, ask some very simple basic questions. Are you lactose intolerant? Are you not lactose intolerant? Do you need more protein because you're working out? Or do you have a sedentary job, so you might want to cut down on the carbs? Your grandfather's generation may have eaten a lot more carbs, right?
Yeah.
You have a family history of heart disease and so on, you might want to cut down on fat, right? Saturated fat and so on. So then it's basically common sense application of today's context to then tweak it appropriately. And then be absolutely sensible about when you want to go out and enjoy. Like, remember, people sometimes use this definition of sattvic, rajasic, tamasic, based on some 2000-year-old definition of what elites in society ate. My modern day definition is sattvic is all home cooked food is sattvic, no matter what it is, okay? Including leftovers. It's actually fantastic, right? So that's sattvic. Rajasic is when you go eat in a restaurant or you order from a Swiggy, Zomato, that's Rajasic. It's very high in calories, a lot of fat. Right? Restaurant food is delicious because it is so much, so many calories, fat calories, right?
Yeah.
And so that is something that you have to be sort of moderate about. And the last thing is ultra processed snacks and desserts and all your kaju katli and that kind of stuff is all tamasic because you have to be extraordinarily moderate about. Right?
Yeah.
So you basically just apply these simple rules and again, always remember that what food advice you see on social media is content, including mine. It's not knowledge. So it's meant to provoke you. It's not necessarily going to be useful knowledge most of the time, right? Most of the time, you can get away by eating anything as long as it's in moderation, and your overall number of calories is you're not exceeding much. You are exercising, and you are avoiding foods that you may not react well to, like foods that might be inflammatory to you, allergic to you, and so on. That's really all there is to it, right? So that's really all I would say. Yeah.
So I just have a question, sort of an offshoot about this, that the canned and processed food is very much available in Europe a lot,
Yes.
and people usually eat a lot of it. And in India,
they
it's
do.
coming up. It's a big
It's
industry.
coming up. Yes.
So is it that it's just a matter of availability and accessibility to technology that we were lagging behind it, or is it because there is a digestion factor and how we process the food that's coming into being?
So I think processed food has to do with two historical factors, right?
Yeah.
One is just simply modernization.
Yeah.
In that, as you urbanized and as more people stopped being farmers and started working in factories and in knowledge work and all of that, right?
Yeah.
And as women started working, I think the idea of somebody sitting and dedicated cooking food for you is a very Indian luxury.
Yeah.
Right? It's a very patriarchal luxury, to be honest, right?
Yeah.
So England, we make fun of British food as being worse, but we fail to recognize that their food is not great because they were amongst the first countries on the planet where men and women started working equally. They started working in factories, right?
Yeah.
So I think there is that one aspect. So that once you do that, then convenience becomes important. Right? So sausages and canned beans and canned whatever it is, right? All of that stuff, the stuff that you don't need to spend hours cooking, just put it in a pan, heat it, and eat, is essentially. Now, I think you also have to kind of see that we blame that diet, but Indians are far more unhealthy compared to Westerners, right? Now, so therefore, I think here's the really controversial thing. We Indians might want to really introspect about their traditional, what they consider their traditional diet, right? Instead of blaming burgers, pizzas, canned food, processed food, which, by the way, per capita, Indians consume far less than they do, far a fraction of what they do.
Yeah.
And yet we have the largest number of diabetics on the planet. So don't blame that food. Blame the food you're eating right now, right? And when you introspect on that, you recognize that your grandfather's diet was suitable for someone who worked the land, someone who did a lot of physical labor, someone who lived in a completely different lifestyle. And you, on the other hand, should not be eating that many carbohydrates. Just look at the Indian meal. It's just death by carbs, right?
Yeah.
See, formula of a burger is carb, protein, carb. That's the formula. In India, it's carb, deep fried carb, and more carb, right? Aloo tikki burger. So therefore, I think you really want to. So yes, you must be moderate about processed food. And I would like to distinguish between canned food and processed food. They're not the same thing. Canned chana, for example, if you're young and you don't have time to sit and soak and pressure cook, absolutely go for canned chana, as healthy. Remember, they are vacuum sealed. They are as good as fresh chana. So I said there's many of those things are actually just apply common sense science, right? It's vacuum. Nothing is happening inside. And it can stay decades. There are canned chickpeas from World War II that are safe to eat now, as long as there's no leak, right?
Yeah.
So I think so it's don't overthink these things, because what happens is that when you overthink these things, you forget the more important thing, which is that was you're probably eating too many calories and most of it is from carbohydrates. That's the fundamental problem, right? So if you think a samosa is somehow healthier than a burger, you're just being delusional.
Yeah. No, I think that's an important thing because I think these discussions never happen in our
Yeah.
homes about,
Yeah.
these kind of things
Yes.
because it's all
Right.
taken for
Yeah.
granted.
In fact, I was on a TV program. It was a debate program
Yeah.
in Chennai in Tamil.
Hmm.
And as usual, one uncle stood up and said that it's all the nowadays the diabetes is because of all of these people eating Western food and pasta and all of that.
Yeah.
And then the host actually asked him, our grandmothers and our grandaunts and our uncles and all the other people today with diabetes, which of them is eating pasta?
Yeah.
They all have diabetes. They have it at the same rate that everyone has, right? So please introspect on your traditional diet instead of blaming these things.
No, I think that's a very, very, very valid point
Yeah,
about it. But we have a lot more questions. Maybe we can
sure.
go to that.
Yeah, we keep it shorter than the answers. Some
Yeah.
people are following the vegan diet. Is there a scientific reason? See, again, diets are more ideological. So don't look for science in a diet, right? Science comes in a diet when you are thinking about calories, macros, micros. Are you getting everything? So you could have a scientifically, nutritionally complete vegan diet. You could have a nutritionally complete non-vegan diet. It doesn't matter. It could be vegetarian, vegan, non-vegan, keto. It doesn't matter. You can be healthy on any diet. You could also be unhealthy on any diet,
Yeah.
right? Again, for a lot of people, vegans have to pay a little bit more attention to protein and certain micronutrients that simply are not available in plants. So they may have to supplement like vitamin B12 and so on, and also omega-3 fatty acids, which only come from animal sources. And also all the complete amino acid mix, which again, to be honest, I think you can still mix. Soy is a fantastic source of high quality protein. But again, you have to eat more diverse sources of protein so that you get all the amino acids and so on. So in that sense, I think, don't break your head. So all diets can be scientific and completely unscientific. Mostly
Yeah.
people stick to them not because they're scientific, but because they're ideological. Right?
Yeah.
They're somehow
Yeah.
convinced that this is the right thing. I have to be kosher, I have to be halal, I have to be vegan. There's no difference between each one of these. Yes.
Yeah. No,
Okay,
absolutely.
right.
Next.
Does eating hard red meat actually dangerous and affect your gut system? Look, anything in excess is going to be bad for you. Um, and again, if you really look at the hierarchy of things, red meat is going to be high in saturated fat. And again, it's possible to also eat red meat that is leaner. Like, for example, mutton is generally lean red meat.
Yeah.
But beef and pork are very saturated, fatty kind of red meat, right? And again, within that also, the evidence for regular consumption of red meat is actually pretty weak. But we do know that consuming it in processed form like sausages is not necessarily great, as in like large amounts, right? So therefore, again, these are also deeply cultural, right? If you go to the northern, the colder it gets, the more red meat people eat, right?
Yeah.
Inuits actually don't eat plants at all; they only eat whale and seal and all of that, right? So it is just that I think geography plays a role, and if it is if it has been traditionally part of a diet, and you have an overall balanced diet, I think it should be perfectly fine. So don't break your head. Yeah.
Yeah. I think geography and occupation. These are two things which actually decides
Yeah.
how you burn
Economics.
your
Yes.
calories.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So, okay, next one is very interesting
Yes.
question.
Is learning a language
No, the one before that.
or one before that?
Yeah.
When
When
you're in
you're
the
in the
kitchen and
kitchen.
enjoy food and overall experience, why worry about science? Actually, I think this is, in some sense, I think this is doing disservice to human imagination. right?
Yeah.
You could go to the kitchen and just simply, chop your onions and just, you just wipe the tears from your eyes from the onion, and then you just go about cooking, and then you can enjoy that. You can enjoy the dish itself, right? And that's fine. Nobody's judging you for it, right? But if I were to say that when you cut an onion, right, what happens is that your knife is actually cutting through some of the cells, and the onion, as a living thing, does not want to be killed. And since it cannot move, what it does is that it synthesizes an enzyme called syn-propanethiol that is volatile. And 30 seconds after you cut, that enzymatic reaction produces that volatile sulfurous molecule, which, when it hits your eye, breaks down into dilute sulfuric acid. Right? I think there is something deeply moving and poetic and tragic about an onion trying to do an acid attack on you to prevent being killed. Right? So I think, and when you there, so the science can truly move you when you understand why something happens, right? So it doesn't take away from the enjoyment of the cooking at all. It's not like you're going to stop chopping onion because you suddenly don't feel bad for the onion and so on. But I think it is just that I think science can give you joy of understanding the way the universe works,
Yeah.
right? But for sure, you can skip all of it and simply enjoy the food also. There is no harm at all, right?
Yeah.
But why insist that somebody who's enjoying the science is not enjoying the food? You could do both.
Yeah.
I would actually say you're doing twice as much enjoyment.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. The next one about learning language is learning language consumption.
Oh no, it's absolutely a creation, because I think learning is a I like to draw. I think it's a blurry line. There is reading and then there is deep reading, right?
Yeah.
Reading is consumption, but deep reading, I would argue, is a little bit more beneficial, because you're reading, you're pausing to think, you're also kind of taking some side routes to dig deep into, go into rabbit holes, right? You perhaps, I think a lot of people who deep read also take down notes. At that point, it becomes creation, right? So I'm assuming in the process of learning a language, you're probably writing stuff down, or unless you're only purely listening and repeating and listening and repeating, the act of repeating is again creation.
Yeah.
See, remember, you have to remember that when you're watching a movie, it's passive. You are not doing anything, right? On the other hand, learning a language is absolutely active. If you're trying to learn a language by only listening to the audio and not doing anything, that's consumption, but you're not learning, right?
Hmm.
So that's what I would say.
Okay. So again, watching TV. So why would people say we should not watch TV and eat food?
There's a fascinating study that showed that. I think we are Homo sapiens. Most of our evolution was spent in times when food was very scarce. We were hunter gatherers, pre-agriculture, right? Food abundance happened only after agriculture. Agriculture is less than 10,000 years old, right? Homo sapiens is like 500,000 years old, right?
Yeah.
And most of our evolution is about get all the calories you can whenever you can. So we are wired somehow to overeat and to not be able to resist food. And we have suddenly, in a very short amount of time, in a very, very abundant food environment, right?
Yeah.
So what happens here is essentially that that's why these habits help. Timing and things like, for example, the smaller the size of the plate, the less food you'll eat.
Hmm.
It seems very obvious, but also there's something weird, right? It's just that a smaller plate somehow cognitively convinces you to put a smaller amount because you want to see a little bit of the gap.
Hmm.
But on a larger plate, the same amount your plate looks too empty, and you'll want to add a little bit more.
Yeah.
Which is, by the way, restaurants use this thing. So buffet plates will always be smaller than the a la carte plates.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
want you to eat more a la carte. They don't want you to eat more buffet, because that's it's all you
Ah,
can eat, right? Yeah.
that's-
So that's why the buffet plate will always be smaller in size. So like that, and I think what happens here is that the way we eat, we have a very sophisticated system, of leptin and ghrelin and these other hormones that signals satiety. Right? You eat, and then when your intestine has gotten enough calories, your intestine measures calories, right? And then it via the gut-brain axis, you have this molecule being sent, that will then signal to the brain, okay, stop eating, right? Okay, I'm feeling really full, right? So that's the satiety index, right? Now, in the modern day food, uh, many foods do not signal satiety at all. Refined carbohydrates barely do. That's why you can, eat as much refined carbohydrates as you want, with this much biryani rice and, four parathas and all of that. But fats and your protein and fiber, they signal satiety very rapidly. That's why you eat like, 3 pieces of chicken, you'll be like absolutely stuffed.
Yeah.
Right? That's why you eat one whey protein shake, you will be absolutely stuffed for the next like 3-4 hours, right? So, what happens is that this is also the entire experience of eating, mindful eating, all of that is what is necessary for the satiety thing to work. Okay? If you are watching this super fascinating thriller series that you've been binging and you want to know what's going to happen, your brain will be distracted and not notice the satiety signals coming at all. So on average, what they find is that if you're watching something while eating, people eat 15-20% more. Right? Again, it doesn't mean that you should not watch or something, but it's just knowing this is a useful thing to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's like it's called binge watching also. So
Yeah.
Okay. Just to be selective with the questions because there's so many questions coming up.
Yes.
What are some easy ways home cooks can incorporate scientific principles into their everyday cooking?
So ignore and don't watch nutrition content on social media. Then you'll be scientific. Watch recipes. Then you'll get inspired. Cook regularly. And I think, see, scientific principles in cooking are actually, as I say in my book, there's so very few, right? Understanding temperature, understanding specifically what happens above the boiling point of water when food is very close to burning, but a lot of flavor gets unlocked. Browning happens at 110 and above, right? What happens to foods at the application of heat, right? What happens at what temperatures, right? What temperature does an egg cook, right? At what pressure? So it's kind of very simple kind of things can actually significantly sort of make you a much better cook, right? And about how much salt to put. Right? We know that 1.5 to 2% by weight of any dish is the amount of salt Indians like, right? So people get very, very worked up about it, right? And then once you kind of, then you learn those standard heuristics. And other thing I'll also tell you that in the kitchen, it's the knowledge of cooking that matters, not science.
Yeah.
Right? And cooking comes from just practice and being humble and letting others taste and taking feedback and then correcting it. Right. So you need other people's feedback to judge your cooking. You can't do it yourself. So, because you're going to be saturated by the smells of that cooking. So you're not actually going to enjoy the food that you cook. So it's always cooking is such a beautiful thing that it is intrinsically designed for one person to feed another person. It's not for feeding yourself. Yeah.
Right. So there's one question about how to convince your mom that eating roti and sabzi is not the only way to get a balanced diet.
Yeah. So people will tend to default to, as I said, what their grandmother ate as a diet, right? Um, but I think in today's world, right? People are exposed to. You can see MasterChef, you can see programs, you can see all these things. So you do have friends from other parts of India. They eat different things and so on, right? So clearly, I think it's important for people to understand that India is way even more diverse than Europe. We have so many different eating practices, right? What is when somebody is sick in some part of India, you give a khichdi, and so on. If somebody is sick in southern Tamil Nadu, it's a mutton bone broth is considered to be is sort of like the sickness thing that you eat and so on, right? So I think there's just so much variations, and people eat insects in some parts of India. People eat silkworms, and various kinds of seafood on the coastal side, and so on. So there are 1,000 ways to be nutritious. I think the basic principle is that are you one hierarchy wise, are you getting enough protein is probably the most important consideration, because actually it is the most essential macronutrient. All others are optional actually. A little bit of fat is mandatory. Everything else is up. Carbohydrates are entirely optional, right? But protein you need, right? Fiber you absolutely need, right? Uh, and then you need micronutrients. You need all the minerals, all the vitamins, right? After that, yes, Is my carbohydrates ultra refined or is it also more resistant stuff? Right? Dal is a great example of more resistant stuff. People think dal is protein, it's mostly
Mm,
resistant starch.
mm,
And then finally, obviously, be moderate about how much fat, calories. Right? Indian food is very fatty. A lot of oil goes all over the place. Right? And within that, don't break your head which oil, what refined, unrefined, kachi gani, ghee. None of that actually matters. At a big picture level, amount of fat is way more important than choice of fat.
yeah,
And yet
yeah,
people waste so much time instead of fixing the other more basic issues. Anyway,
yeah. And I think
yep.
this is very, very valid, and probably you can show this
Yes.
recording. We'll send it to all of you so
Yeah,
that
yeah.
you
No,
talk
I
to your
think
mother.
if so somebody's asking eating leftover food, I mean, I this is the hill I will die on. Eating leftover food is one of the most healthiest things you can ever do to your lifestyle. Because by not eating leftover food, you're probably ordering fresh food from restaurants, and that is not healthy. So remember that when you store food in the fridge, you lose nothing. The only things that you lose with time are water soluble vitamins like B and C.
Hmm.
That's it, which are very easily added back to food. Just eat one extra fruit, just squeeze some nimbu, you're done, right? Have a salad on the side, right? So we have this misconceived notion because remember, our idea of food spoilage is pre-refrigeration. That's the heuristic
Yeah,
people have.
yes.
We have not adapted to the fact that not very little spoilage actually happens in the fridge.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think this is something which leads to a lot of food wastage in many homes because they do not want to store the food and they don't want to even store it for a day. So then they also,
Yeah,
let people cook even more and every day so that it leads to wastage and it leads to extra labor and other chaos at
absolutely,
home. So
absolutely. It's just
yeah,
it's criminal actually the amount of wastage we do, right?
yeah,
It's just
yeah, yeah,
you're
yeah.
just giving more work for the women in your family is what's happening. Yes,
So we'll have to close this very soon. We can take one last question.
sure.
Does eating slow harm in any way? Kids tend to take an hour to complete a meal. Any comment on it?
No, I mean, I don't think there's any specific concern there. I think the more important thing is whether or not what all are they eating, right? Are they overeating as a result of taking all this time? Like if you go to eat for this long time, you might actually end up eating more than you need to, and so on. But yeah, as a general rule, I think forming certain kind of habits around eating, like one is balance. The kid should not waste. You should try and eat the vegetables, right? Kids hate vegetables, right? But
Yeah.
I think you have to work them up from. They'll only consider potato to be a vegetable, but then you can go up to carrots, which are again starchy, in that sense, and so on. You might want to really, really, fry the bindi till it's like near black, and then kids will eat it, right? And so I think it's a slow kind of process, but forming these habits of, hey, just eat, don't watch, or, eat it reasonably soon, not like, don't take like, 1 hour and so on. But I think the time is really, really less of a factor if you really ask.
So I think we've touched upon a lot of things from practice to religion to methodologies and everything.
Yeah.
So it was,
Yes.
I think, very interesting and it was very engaging. And I also like to say that many of these principles lies behind the what you learn in school, and which is why
Yes.
we want to take it forward through the program that we're doing, the Lodha Genius Program. I've put in the link to the website here, and the
Yeah.
application starts on December 1st. So just want to tell everyone to send your 9 to
Yes.
12 standard graders for this so that we have more encounters with science. And
Yeah.
also, Krish, after this, we are trying to get many people who are, scientists working in different walks of life to contextualize
Yes.
basically very similar things, but take it to different context and get it to public
Absolutely.
so
Yes.
that we have somebody
Yes.
with authority to speak about all these
Super.
facts.
I just happened to notice this one last thing, but
Yeah,
I thought it'd be a fun last thing for all of you to go and research. There's one
yeah.
question that says that Indian people say to eat carrots is healthy for the eyes. Is it true? Now, the fact is that, of course, as with most vegetables, anything with carotenoids is generally good for overall eye health.
Mhm.
Now, but what you might not know is the fact about carrots being good for the eye is pure World War II propaganda. Go Google for it.
Ah,
In order to hide radar, which the British had invented, and they did not want the Germans to know that they had radar. That's how they were shooting down these German planes so efficiently. They
I see.
spread a rumor that all their pilots were eating carrots
Yeah,
but it also had to sound plausible to the Germans because the Germans were pretty smart. They also had scientists, right? Just to know beta carotene becomes retinol. and that is vitamin A is necessary for night vision, so our pilots can see in the dark. Okay, so it was pure propaganda. It's not true. So
No, I think these are very interesting things. I think we'll have to have another session for it, but great food for thought. You
sure.
can actually go back and read all these things. That's a major idea of doing
Yes.
this.
Read more, watch less.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Read and educate the people around you, so that
Yes.
it's not the people just watching this webinar. So thank you so much, Krish, for your time. I know you're very busy, and thank to all of you for joining us on this Saturday. And so keep tuned in. We will send you all the details for the next webinar, and we'll also send you this recording, so you can just pass it around and just not limit to these people who are here. So thank you
Super.
so much. All right,
Thank
bye
you.
bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.